Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm here with Bhante Sudato to my right and Ayavima to my left. And we're here for another episode of Monk Chat, where you have the opportunity to ask any question related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha that you would like, and we'll try our best to answer them. So whenever you're ready, feel free to type in your questions and yeah, we can take it from there. Hello to Geeta checking in, and to all the other friends that we're slowly seeing coming in, just as a little number on the screen. And while you check in, maybe we can start by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato Sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. All right, and welcome to Kaz, friend. Good to see you. Yeah, it's been a while. Actually, Kaz, friend, if I remember correctly, is watching from Holland. That is Venerable Vimala's
Goedenavond. Of goedemorgen.
Home country. And hello to Kumu, Rick, Manal, Jake, still subject to clinging. I'm always hoping it will be different. Mary, Laura, Gayatri, good to see you. Friends, welcome. Whenever you're ready, once again, feel free to type in. Good to see you once again, Mary, our neighbor. Hopefully we'll see your face one of these days soon. And hello also to Chad. And if there are any of our friends here that have any questions, Kaz, friend replied in your language, Venerable.
Goedenavond, ja. Leuk je te zien.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah. Except for there, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, I think, something like that.
More like Gute Nacht. I don't know how to say it in Dutch. So subject to Kling is also hoping that that is going to change. That's great. Lovely. Okay.
Okay, and no questions, so that might be the end of Monk Chat. Hello and goodbye.
Monk peace.
It's like the Mahayana Sutra where the Buddha gets on the seat to give a Dhamma talk, and then he just holds up a flower and then gets off the seat.
Oh, lovely. We're missing the flower.
Happened once to Bhante Sujato. He went on Dhamma seat during a talk and then, or during a retreat. And the translator, it was in Germany, he said, was sitting ready to translate and nothing came. And it was just no inspiration. Like nothing came to mind. It was just, okay, we'll sit.
Okay, we have a few friends that are asking questions. Michael, can you talk about the difference between the concept of a self and a soul being reincarnated? Well, since I think Bhante and I have spoken about that quite a lot on this channel, maybe we can pass it on to Venerable Vimala to hear maybe the same answer, but in different words.
Well, in the soul and reincarnation are not both not terms that you actually hear in Buddhism. The Buddha basically says there is no soul, and there is not reincarnation, but rebirth, which is slightly different. The difference is that there's no actual self that goes from one life, hopping from one life to another forever and ever and ever, but more a process that continues on to and forms the next life. And Ajahn Brahm always has this simile of a mango. Like you have a mango and you put it in the ground, you put it in fertile ground, and then a tree comes out, and on that tree there's lots of new mangoes. But of course, you don't get apples or pears or anything. You get new mangoes. So there is some information that's gone from this old mango to the new mango. But you can't say it's a reincarnation of like that old mango. But the information has continued on. It's just a process that continues on.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And Kumu says, in sitting meditation, when we pay attention to the feet, is the attention on the touch feet on the floor or on the feelings of the feet, cold, warm, etc.?
Well, either one are valid practices. So if we wanted to get really precise about this, then the touch sensation of the feet against the floor would be kayagata sati, so just mindfulness of the body. Whereas paying attention to the sensation of cold and warmth would technically be the meditation on the fire element, if we wanted to get really technical about these things. But realistically, both are just different variations on bringing attention to your body. And either one are perfectly valid ways of practicing. Either one will cultivate mindfulness focused on the body, which is the point. So either one is fine. It's really whatever works for you.
Thank you, Venerable. And Break asks, Venerables, what are the practices which will help us to become content and easily satisfied? Thank you. Well, the Noble Eightfold Path, it's very easy. So that's the complete cessation of suffering and comes with lots of contentment and being easily satisfied. So, yeah. Chad says, in the Thai tradition, there is chanting Namo Buddhaya or Buddha. Can I chant while visualizing the Buddha in my peripheral awareness, or should I focus on going through the Buddha's qualities, Buddhanusati? Venerable Bhima?
It's basically what works best for you. One Buddhanusati that I do is from Ajahn Brahm, and that's basically visualizing that you are the Buddha. So that's quite novel. It's not in the suttas, but I really like it, and a lot of people quite like it because it gets you into this understanding of a little bit, at least, in its understanding of what is this the Buddha really is. I have to read things, sorry, rather than if especially like Buddha and Namo Buddhaya, that are like these chants that are quite often practiced by people. If you find it helpful, then especially during walking meditation, I think it can be very helpful. Then please go for that. And if you visualizing the Buddha helps, or going through the Buddha's qualities helps, then please do that. Just see what the effect is. Be very mindful of, do it for a little while, and then say like, okay, how does this resonate for me? How does this work for me? And do my defilements actually decrease? That's basically the bottom line of where that's where you want to go. It's like, do your defilements decrease? Do your peace of mind increase? See how it works.
Thank you, Venerable. And Kauser Friend, your connational, says, I've been going through some gender discovery lately for myself, so I'm happy with the recent talks. I've not completed watching them all yet, so my questions might already be answered. I'm worried that pursuing any sort of gender transition might risk me not being able to ordain. I'm also worried that me pursuing this means I'm too attached, and that's what I should work on instead. Thoughts? I'll also pass this on to Venerable Bhima, since
yes, we actually have a small transgender ordination work group with some monastics and some aspirants that we're who want to ordain. So we're working on it. But yeah, it depends a bit where you want to go. So I would say go to the monastery where you would really like, where you feel that you could really benefit, that you could really develop, and ask there as well if what their stance is on it. Or you could come here, and I'm pretty sure it's not an issue at all whether you've transitioned or not. So yes, it shouldn't be an issue at all. But in many monasteries, it still is, basically. That's the bottom line of it.
Thank you. And Jake says, Venerables, do the early Buddhist texts speak at all of any of the major bodhisattvas revered in the Mahayana, such as Avalokiteshvara? If so, what role can they play in our practice? It's a great question for Bhante Siddhasa.
Mostly no. Actually, one interesting exception is Vajrapani. Though in the Pali Suttas, Vajrapani is not referred to as a bodhisattva. They're just referred to as a deva. That's one of the few bodhisattvas I know whose name appears in the Pali Suttas. And Vajrapani is actually a very significant figure in Chinese Buddhism, but not so much in the other branches of Mahayana. Anyway, what role can they play in our practice? Well, again, what is a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva is a person who has a deep and thorough commitment to cultivating the paramis, the requisites for becoming a Buddha. Someone who has a commitment to cultivating, above all other qualities, cultivating extremely strong compassion, limitless compassion, while also developing wisdom to support the cultivation of that compassion. Being who has the aspiration to eventually attain Buddhahood. So these are all extremely praiseworthy qualities and qualities that we can emulate in our own practice. So as role models of very advanced Buddhist practitioners who are intent upon attaining awakening and who have made much progress in that direction, then yeah, they serve as excellent role models. So I personally have a very positive connection with a couple of bodhisattvas in particular. So Avalokiteshvara and Kushtagarbha. So Guanyin Bodhisattva and Jizo Bodhisattva, the names we normally know them by. There's particular reasons for that, why I have a connection with those in particular. So yeah, I mean, read about a bunch of the major bodhisattvas and see which ones really touch your heart, and aspire to cultivate those same qualities within yourself. Whatever it is about them that inspires you, then use them as inspiration to be more like them in that respect. So again, it's the qualities that they've developed that's important. When people start getting into questions like, are they real or are they not real? That's actually completely missing the point. The point is, are they inspiring us to cultivate wholesome qualities of mind? That's what's important.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And Laura says, a couple of weeks ago, Bhante Sudaso gave a Dhamma talk from Aggisutta Samyutta Nikaya 4653 about ways to meditate with a tired or energetic mind. Are there other suggestions for other hindrances of the mind? Well, briefly speaking, the Buddha gives several different ways to address the hindrances. One is if our mind tends in particular towards sensuality, to essentially really kind of make sure that also, like as a preliminary practice, to really stop sort of delighting and paying attention so much to the mark of the beautiful. So with everything that we love and like about anything in samsara, which we usually tend to do a lot, whether it's actually something material, but also something mental, like different qualities that we like in particular, and so forth, like all of those things that really delight the mind. And start actually, instead of focusing on the drawbacks, and obviously all the different meditations or techniques that focus on the sort of less pleasant aspects of the body. If someone has strong lust pervading the mind, are very useful. But keeping in mind that the objective is not to develop an aversion or repulsion or disgust for the body, but rather an accurate understanding of the body. So usually we tend to fixate on how pretty and how beautiful someone is that we're attracted to. And instead we want to, understand that after that layer, there's actually a little bit of a different sort of substance, a different type of condition. Yeah. So, for example, if that person is having to go through surgery and we actually have an insight in their interiors, we might have a bit of a different kind of state of mind, which is not necessarily attraction, right, towards their all internal organs, for example. And all the different mucuses and oils that usually actually one becomes very much aware once they enter a relationship, right? At the very beginning, as there's this beautiful Italian song that goes, I really like it. I think it's very Buddhist in only this fragment that goes, mi ritorni in mente come bella come sei, come non sei tu, which means you come back into my mind. You come to my mind, beautiful like you are not. So essentially, it's how we're constantly creating, this beautiful person in the mind, and then once we actually are meeting them, we're kind of like, if we haven't seen them in a while, it's kind of like, actually, they're not that great. And that's also usually how relationships go. At the very beginning, we're like, oh, just such an amazing person, smells so well, so beautiful, and then after a while, like, actually, they're like breath stinks, and also their armpits, and look at that crooked tooth, and it's kind of like, but it's always been there. It's just that we were being blind to it. So we want to develop that sort of awareness of all of these different layers that are actually always part of reality. It's just that we have a selective sort of way of watching reality. When it comes to aversion, interestingly enough, the Buddha does not recommend for us to fixate on all the beautiful, on the mark of the beautiful. Sorry to break the news, to compensate, but rather actually to develop a mind of loving kindness. And so that counteracts the mind from falling in depression. Once you start seeing that everything in samsara is not that great as you had made it up and believed it to be, then the mind can actually get quite grumpy and it's like, oh, everything sucks, everything is horrible. And that's also quite an obstruction. So cultivating a different type of happiness, focusing the mind on a different type of mark of the beautiful, which is not, oh, how pretty, once again, that person is, or how pretty this object is, this purse is, this bag is, or this meal is, or whatever it is, but rather developing the mind, we get to the sort of, we solve the problem at the root. And lastly, the one that is missing is doubt and restlessness. Actually, restlessness was done already. So doubt. Well, it's very simple. Just don't pay attention to whatever is the subject of doubt in the mind. So one particular thing that we're doubting and we're like, oh, I don't know, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Just don't pay attention to it. Just stop. As simple as that. And it's actually very simple. Once again, very simple instructions, but really powerful. Sometimes I remember my mind would like really obsess about perhaps, some kind of like 1% of the suttas can be a little bit uninspiring. Then my mind, instead of focusing on 99% of the inspiring, sutta, it was like that 1%. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, am I really on the right path? There was this actually like sentence that I read and and the mind can just keep on working this thing up, and you can lose so much time for nothing. So just stop and focus on redirect the mind towards something else. would be really bizarre, right? That instead of like lighting a candle, we would ask, oh, is this lighter going to work? I'm not quite sure. Oh, what if, like, I try to light it and it doesn't light the thing? Okay, then how about I don't light it altogether? It's just bizarre. We're smarter than that with everything else. So we want to apply the same attitude for this. Okay, and Gayatri says, I look at my 7-year-old kind son, and I'm touched by the purity of his heart and mind. I used to feel I have to aspire to that unadulterated state of being. This got me thinking, if we're born enlightened and this got me thinking, if we're born enlightened and let dukkha take over us through life.
No, we're born unenlightened, and we can choose to either make it worse, which is pretty often what we choose, or we can choose to progress towards awakening. But every now and then you get someone who has already developed a lot of wholesome qualities in past lives. So from the time they're born, they're already a very wholesome person. But you also get people who they're born bad. Like they're born and they're already overflowing with greed, anger, delusion, and they're just nasty little miserable things from the time they're born. So yeah, it's not true that we're all born pure and get worse. We're all born impure, and we can either get better or worse depending on what choices we make.
Thank you. And Pia says, can the metaphors used for the jhana, for example, just as if a skilled bathman or bathman's apprentice would pour bath powder, etc., used in practice or just reflected only after? Venerable Dhamma?
Only after.
I think after.
Okay.
After the jhana? Or
after what? Yeah, after what? Is this if you mean after jhana there, or but or you can try and make bath powder. But let me just what I always learn from Abdul Brahm, but there's I've also recently come across a monk from the same Thai forest tradition that had a different opinion on this. But yes, when you go through the jhanas, then afterwards your mind is incredibly clear and your defilements are gone for a very long time. So then you can direct that to things like dukkha, anatta, anicca, to find out or to really penetrate these subjects, and to you can really make a big progression there. So I'm not sure if that answers your question. I don't know if there's another.
I think you're asking if the metaphors can be used as instructions for how to attain jhana. So like the one about like massaging moisture through the bath powder. So like massaging piti, sukha through the mind. Like I think that's more what they're asking.
Okay. Yes, probably. Or at least, yeah.
I'm just guessing. The question is a little bit unclear.
I would say yes. I mean, all the instructions of the Buddha are to be used in practice. So, but if you're already attained jhana, I wouldn't reflect too much after it, because I mean that's the whole point. I mean, it's kind of acute.
Well, in so far, you can reflect afterwards. It's like, how did I do this? How did I get here in this place? And then you can say, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this actually works. And that your mind also, if you reflect on that, your mind learns from that.
Great. Thank you, Venerable. And Sud says, how does one let go of fear of having some bad karma from a past life ripen? We don't know what we did. How do we prevent bad karma from ripening in this life? Would sharing merit help? Well, sorry to break the news today. downers. It's how to get less followers. So you can't stop, you can't prevent it. You've done an action, and you're going to reap the consequences of those actions. So if you are afraid, actually, as Punnateri says, as well as others in the canon, if you don't want a result of a bad action, well, just don't do that action to begin with. So there's nothing that we can do right now to purify our past karma. Like, it's been done, it will be done. This being said, what we can do is karma right here, right now. Like, in every moment, we can decide to make new karma and wholesome karma, following the teachings of the Buddha. And so that is where we should focus our mind. What has been done has been done. That's can be changed. But what we're doing right now, that creates new vipaka, new results of karma. And the Buddha gives this simile of, one thing is if we put a grain of salt in a little, a handful of salt in a glass of water. And another thing is we take a handful of salt and we put it in a lake, right? So obviously the glass with the salt will taste very salty, the water, and it's not really pleasant, huh? But instead, if we go to the lake, it's fresh water, so it's diluted. So that's what we're empowered to do right here, right now, following the teachings. And in terms of fear, usually with everything, actually, what works for me personally is to always think about the worst case scenario and pretend that it's already happened. So kind of going like, this is happening right here, right now, and wait until my mind kind of stops fighting that hypothetical scenario, and you have like equanimity towards it. It's already happened. And then that has helped me throughout the years to just be okay whether that happens or basically it doesn't happen, and I'm like, oh great, win-win. But if it happens, I'm already prepared. So that comes to mind. But recollecting one's own goodness, all the good deeds that we make, is also a way to prick up the mind and really focus on what we can do right now. If the other venerables have anything else.
Yeah, what springs to mind is that even Mahamoggallana, one of the greatest disciples of the Buddha, was actually, the story goes that he was killed by bandits due to a very bad act in a past life. So karma that's ripen, but we shouldn't really get too fearful or anxious about that, because first of all, you don't know. You might have like lots of good karma as well. So why focus on this to the bad one? And also, like, you don't know what's going to happen. It's in the future. So we don't have to have that fear. So let's stay with that. Look at that fear and see what's going on there, really, and try and let go of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Venerable. And Wasabi-chan says, does mindfulness and investigation lead to equanimity?
Actually, if you're doing it correctly, then yes. Because investigation in Buddhist terms, it's usually investigation of the anicca, dukkha, anatta characteristics of our experience. So when we clearly see that what we're experiencing is impermanent, then the natural effect of the mind is equanimity. We see that there's no point in reacting with either desire or aversion, because desire is pointless, because whatever we're desiring is impermanent. In fact, it's disappeared as soon as we turn our attention towards it. Aversion is also pointless, because once again, it's disappeared as soon as we turn attention towards it. And because we're paying close attention with mindfulness, then we also don't fall into delusion or apathy. And the same goes for the other two characteristics. So recognizing the unsatisfying nature of things, then we don't cling to them. But we also recognize the dukkha characteristic of aversion, so we don't get into that either. and recognizing things as being impersonal, then we acknowledge that this is just a natural process unfolding. So when we stop taking things personally, that also naturally results in equanimity. So briefly speaking, yes, mindfulness and investigation, in particular, the observation of the three characteristics, naturally leads to equanimity. Yeah, equanimity arising from wisdom.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bante. And Hasanta asks, I thought we were enlightened and only obstructed by the defilements. So eradicating them reveals the true state. Otherwise, isn't Nibbana dependent on the condition of Sila, Samadhi, Panya? Venerable Bhima?
Hate to break the bad news, but no, you're not enlightened when you get born.
Today we're like full of bad news here.
And yes, you have lots of defilements. But the good news is that the Buddha said you can reach enlightenment in this very life if you practice well and if you get rid of all these defilements. So yeah, I think that's my short answer.
Sadhu. Thank you. I was not laughing at Venerable Vima's content, but just at the sort of, the fact that in the Theravada tradition, we're not exactly trying to please people. And
in fact, it's almost kind of like we almost hope people don't like what we're saying, because then it shows that they're not really interested in practicing Buddhism. So point being, if somebody is not really interested in practicing the path, then they can go and do what they actually want to do. But people who like what we're saying, then it shows that they have enthusiasm and inspiration in the Dhamma, and they'll be really committed to practicing.
I see.
If hearing these seemingly depressing answers actually fills you with joy, as it does us, clearly, then that shows that you actually have a strong karmic affinity with Buddhism. But if these answers upset you and disturb you, well, then it's good to ask yourself why. Why does it bother you to hear these things? So we're just saying Dhamma. So if Dhamma is disturbing, the question is why. I didn't say it quite right the first time. Yes. Came out a little bit sideways.
And so still subject to clingy says, we do love your frank answers, Bante. So there's appreciation. And Happy Smiley, oh, you're so kind. Very kind, Happy Smiley. And Chad says, if I am allowed another question, of course. I grew up Hindu and prayed to the Devas. Can I still pray to them, not as the ultimate, but as worldly deities? And can I use this prayer as an extension of Devanussati? Absolutely. Yes. Also, that's kind of like very commonplace. I've seen pretty much everywhere, like the Sri Lankan temples. Usually there's a Deva room, and definitely has all the Hindu gods, at least the ones at the temples that I've been here in the US, as well as sometimes also Christian deities and so forth, and other religions as well. So yeah, that's great. And Hasanta says, not to worry, it's not news to me. Perfect. And Hasanta says, my question was about Nibbana not being like other conditional, hence impermanent phenomena like sankharas.
Yeah, so because this is actually an important distinction. So what we're trying to realize is the unconditional, the unconditioned element, the Nibbana Dhatu. And that's it's something which is, in theory, it's immediately accessible to everyone. It's something that, in theory, any one of us can see. But the reason why we don't see it is because we're clouded by defilements and delusions. So then one way of talking about awakening is that we're clearing away the defilements and delusions that obstruct our capacity to clearly see the Nibbana Dhatu, to clearly see the true nature of reality. So in that way of looking at things, the only difference between us and a fully awakened being is that we still have a mind which is clouded by defilement and delusion. and that fundamentally there's no difference in the basic nature of our minds and the minds of the Buddhas, except that our mind has defilements and delusions, and a Buddha's mind does not. So this is the concept of Buddha nature, the concept that the mind of an unawakened being is not fundamentally different from the mind of a Buddha. The difference is just the quantity of defilement that's present. So this is a way of talking where your earlier question actually is correct. But it's more of a Mahayana way of talking about it, though it's also a valid way of coming to the same way of speaking.
Great, thank you, Venerable. And then Mark says, so in my experience, the universe or greater consciousness seems more interested in having us learn to do the right moral thing. So the concept of a punishing universe based on bad things done in the past is not so useful. Does Buddhism have this concept of a greater consciousness? Is this Nibbana? So I think there's a lot of different things packed up in here, but I feel like addressing the punishing sort of way, which I think that maybe is what you're somewhat connecting to karma. And that's actually a wrong understanding of karma. I mean, do we actually think that it's the universe? I mean, if I take this thing and I drop it and it falls and it breaks, right? So I drop it and it just follows the law of gravity and it falls and breaks. Do I think that the universe is punishing me or punishing the clock or punishing? We don't think about it in that way, right? We just think about its natural law. And actually, thank you so much for explaining to me the natural law. So now I know that, I really care about the clock and I'll pay attention not to throw it on the floor if I don't want it to disintegrate. So it's the same with the law of karma. It's not that karma or the universe or anyone is trying to punish us, but rather there is, it's a natural law, cause and effect. You do one thing, you get one result. It's as simple as that. And yeah, definitely greater consciousness is Nibbana. No. I wouldn't, no. And Happy Smiley says, why disciples of Mahayana so against our concept of the Buddha? How to share Dhamma with them when the views are so different?
I'm not completely convinced the views are so different. There's a few divergences on some relatively refined and subtle points of doctrine, but for the most part, the views are actually not particularly different. So maybe Happy Smiley, maybe if you can mention specific examples, then we can talk about specific examples.
And another question is there a third eye theory? What is that third eye? Venerable Bimala?
No, not in Buddhism. The early Buddhist texts don't talk about the third eye. But I just looked at the statue up here, and there is this, and all the statues, or most of the statues, they have this sort of little dots where the third eye is. So I don't know, Bante, do you know how this works with the statues?
I thought that represented the little tuft of hair on the forehead that Buddhas supposedly have.
Yeah, the statue of Patachara in the hallway also has that.
Maybe it represents spiritual attainment then.
Yeah.
Like the whole spike on the top of the head of the Buddha. The Buddha didn't actually have a spike coming out of his head. It's meant to be
yes, that's true. Yeah.
Like a metaphorical representation of spiritual attainment. So maybe that's what the dot on the forehead represents. I'm actually not sure.
Tom Wade, do you know what the dot represents? Maybe.
I thought the concept, I'm not sure about a specific kind of third eye concept, but the concept of having having kind of a supernormal vision, whether it might be clairvoyance or simply like higher knowledge in general.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Venerable. And Mel says, does Christianity have deities? Well, we're not really like the best people to ask about Christianity. But if I think I might have said deities in Christianity in my answer before, and I would say yes, angels, at least in Catholicism, also saints. Like there's, we have a lot in Mother Mary, definitely as a deity. We have a lot in Catholicism that can be material for Devanussati. Yeah, and Happy Smiley says angels are devas, different in languages. Yeah, exactly. There's so many different ways, different languages to talk about the same thing, pretty much. Okay, not any other question yet. Anyone have anything in their minds?
I just wanted to ask a little further on the Devanussati. Do you have any recommendations for how to recollect the devas in a productive way that brings joy and light to the mind?
Yeah, actually, the Buddha's advice on this is, to think about the different categories of devas and to think about what good deeds and wholesome qualities they developed in order to have the karma to be reborn as devas. And then to reflect, I have those same qualities. I have also cultivated similar good deeds, similar acts of kindness and generosity. So I also have the necessary karma to reborn as a deva. So this is the Buddha's instructions on Devanussati, is to reflect that you have the same good karma and good qualities that the devas cultivated in order to become devas. So that's the Buddha's instructions. I've also found, in my own practice, I found it useful combining Devanussati with metta. So in the early days of my metta practice, it was extremely difficult for me to do metta at all. And for some reason, I found doing metta for devas was much easier than humans. Metta for humans has always been a bit challenging for me. But angels and cats, those are easy. So I always tell people, start with what's easy. And for me, devas and cats, those are easy. I can do metta for them.
Anything else to share, Venerable?
No.
Devas?
It's
No.
fine.
Okay. And Sarah says, reflecting on dukkha and samsara, sometimes I felt a feeling that nothing in this world is worthwhile, of disappointment and not wanting to be involved in anything in this world. Is that normal? It's great. Yeah.
Yes, we are a very positive religion.
Yeah, sadhu. Yeah, keep going. And Misty said, see how happy we are.
Yeah, this is the beginning of happiness.
It is. But actually, in all seriousness, sometimes though, that feeling, actually, I think we were talking about it the other day, there is, once this passion starts arising in the mind and things that perhaps are, we're kind of essentially where we were taking refuge. We as Buddhists, we intentionally take refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. But when we're, at least before Buddhism, or even actually if we have formally taken refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, a lot of times, when we are experiencing dukkha, we cope in a lot of different ways. So we take refuge in the fridge, or we take refuge in actually books as well, in literature. We take refuge in music. We take refuge in lots of different things that essentially give us that sort of sensual gratification to kind of calm down that dukkha. And as we practice, then it can happen that those places where we're finding that sukha that were unreliable to begin with, but they seemed somewhat reliable. Yeah, they are extremely unreliable, and they don't give us that fix anymore, right? We're like, I thought, even for example, this ice cream, used to be quite pleasant. It's actually quite dukkha. Or going to that show or listening to having that experience is just dukkha, and we can actually get a little bit depressed and think, perhaps that the practice is actually not working and perhaps making things worse. And that's where I feel that there has to be a bit of faith, where we just keep on practicing. And my experience has been that then we start learning how to essentially create new conditions for happiness to arise in the mind. So once again, like going, for example, dwelling in the divine abode. Yeah, that's actually a really nice place to be. If we start as greed types, actually, and we really get into concentration meditation, it's really like, yeah, it's really nice, feels good. Whew. And also a lot more reliable, by the way. Don't even have to go all the way, outside of the house, the store. Actually, first you have to go and get a job, get money, then take the money, go and find the store, purchase something. There's like a lot of different steps. Instead, you sit down. Pretty good, hey? And then it just gets better and better and better and better and better. Yeah, and the more we let go, the happier we are. And so we start going, oh, I thought it was through accumulation that I was happy. Instead, it's by letting go that I'm happier. So all of that just brings more and more joy. And Misty says, in Mahayana, it seems the goal is to become a bodhisattva. And in Theravada, not. Can you explain? Venerable Vima?
Yes. I don't know if in Mahayana the actual goal is to become a bodhisattva, because I'm not very familiar with Mahayana. And there's also many schools in Mahayana, so I can imagine it's also a bit different in different schools. And in Theravada, we try to become enlightened and get rid of this whole samsara business and get rid of all our defilements. And actually, in that way, you become a field of merit to the world, which is, is very much greater than all the stuff that you can do as a bodhisattva, in my opinion. But of course, there's I'm saying something that's other traditions might not agree with, but in the early Buddhist texts, the Buddha only speaks of the word bodhisattva of himself in between his when he was striving to become enlightened, but he wasn't enlightened yet. So only about this life and not about previous lives. So yeah, it's a different concept in that. I don't know, Banika, can you say a bit more about Mahayana?
Yeah, similarly, I would say it's a bit weird to say that in Mahayana the goal is to become a bodhisattva, because it's kind of like if you're going from here to New York City and you say, well, my goal is to get on the highway. It's like, well, no, your goal is to get to New York City. The highway is just how you're getting from here to there. So no, the goal is not to become a bodhisattva. In Mahayana, the goal is to become a Buddha. And so in theory, Mahayana is all about cultivating the qualities of mind which are necessary for becoming a Buddha. And as it turns out, that overlaps almost 100% with the qualities of mind necessary to become an Arhat. So again, on closer examination, the difference between the two paths winds up being more of an academic distinction than an actual distinction.
Super, thank you. And Manal says, question from a friend. Really? But I think this is true. Does Buddhism refer to chakras or energy centers? And actually, Mary says also something along those lines. A friend asked me about chakras, and if the monks offer chakra readings, not these monks, I don't know what chakras are or if they have any role in Theravada practice. Yes or no? Thanks.
No. That's the answer.
Yeah, the only system that I'm aware of that is involved with chakras within Buddhism is Tibetan Buddhism. They have things along those lines, but I am not not even, forget about expert, like not even a basic beginner. So I don't think any of us here, not even you, right? Yeah. So not our thing. And Hasanta says, if you attain the Arupa jhanas, are you inhabiting the Brahma realms with others there, or is it completely different thing?
Well, it's kind of an academic distinction that's being made here, because the beings who live in the formless realms don't interact with anyone. They basically just live in their own mind for a really long time, having a really good time, until eventually they pass away. So even if you are accessing their realm when you're in that state of concentration, it wouldn't really matter, because you can't communicate with them anyway, and they can't communicate with you anyway. So it's kind of irrelevant one way or the other.
Thank you, Bante. And Happy Smiley has a better advertising than all of us for Buddhism. Happy Smiley says, silence, smiles, and do all good are best Buddhism practice.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Yes, that's quite good. And also, we're all going to die.
It's Buddhist humor. It's funny because it's true. And Gayatri says, Venerables, when you renunciated, did you have guilt of any sort towards the family or more? So have trouble with dealing with their reactions? Venerable Dima, do you want to begin?
Well, my mom wasn't particularly thrilled at the prospect. She had been to a Catholic nun school and had a very terrible, traumatic time there. So me becoming a bhikkhuni was a big shock. But did I have guilt? No, because I know it for me it feels like this is the right path. It felt like that then, and now I know that it is the right path. So yeah, no, so absolutely no guilt, but it's taken some time for them to get used to.
Great, thank you. Venerable Siddhasa?
Yeah, zero guilt. Did I have trouble dealing with their reactions? No. No. Yeah. I mean, again, many of them weren't particularly happy with it, but I mean, that's something they had to get over sooner or later. But I was fine either way. Yeah.
Did I have guilt? I had a lot of fear in telling them. And so I remember postponing it over and over again. It was this, yeah, my friends actually, my gay friends were like, yeah, you're basically coming out. It's like the same process. So I was in hiding, and then I came out, and then they were trying to guilt trip me and tell me that I was all wrong. And but I have an Italian family, so they're a little bit more melodramatic maybe than the families of the venerables. So in terms of guilt, I had also like done a little bit of, quite actually not a little bit, quite a bit of work on, put a lot of work on with Buddhist practice to let go a lot of sense of guilt that we kind of have culturally in Italy. And so I had a little bit, but at the same time, my vocation, I was just really happy to just become a monastic. I've never been happier than with practicing the Dhamma. That's why I became a monastic. So it was more kind of like, well, there's no other choice. So it's not that, I mean, I was not going to start procreating children and go to law school, to please my parents. So what they were asking or what they were expecting was just not not ever going to be feasible. So yeah, choice is not happiness. So I had no choice. So it was just kind of waiting how to break the news properly. And Karuna, good to see you, says, Venerable Vimala, it was suggested to me last week to ask my questions about meditation, practice under instruction of Ajahn Brahm. There is a big emphasis on not aggressively reaching out for the breath or keeping the mind in place using willpower. However, all the antidotes I know, hindrances, especially wandering mind or combating sloth and torpor, are a bit aggressive and use willpower grit. Do you have suggestions on a different approach to the hindrances?
Just read it one more time, sorry.
I think she's saying that all the techniques that she knows in basically dealing with the hindrances are pretty aggressive, but the Ajahn Brahm emphasis on being a little bit more relaxed. So she's asking, do you have any suggestions on another approach?
Yeah, there's a little simile that, a little story that Bhante Sujata once told me, and as basically this man who's hiking through the mountains, and he comes to this mountain lake, and he sees there's a man in the mountain lake trying to do something weird, and he asked the man, it's like, well, what are you doing in the middle of that lake? And he says, well, I'm trying to press down all the waves because I want it to be still. And so this first man says, yeah, I see your problem. Well, let me help you. So come out of the lake and go and get some firewood. So the man goes, gets some firewood. He said, okay, now go and get a kettle. And gets a kettle. And it's like, okay, make a fire. So he makes a fire. And when the fire is all lit, and he says, okay, take the kettle and now go to the lake, which is now all quiet and still. So, and so the moral of the story is like meditation techniques are something to distract our mind long enough for our mind to become still in the background. So, yeah, we do use aggressive methods. We actually tend to make it worse in the end. That's also my experience. And what Ajahn Brahm also says, stop wanting to change your meditation, and just take a step back and look at what is there without trying to change it. And then you see it will change automatically at some point. So, but there's a number of techniques, and you just have to try and find out what works for you. There's a number of techniques in the suttas as well, so depending on which hindrance you're most concerned about or what's happening. For instance, if you have a lot of anger in your mind, and you can try some metta meditation, or you can try seeing things from a little different perspective, putting on different glasses to look at what's going on. So there's all these things that you can try, but without really grasping at it, without this force behind it, but with this attitude of, like Ajahn Brahm also said, kindfulness. So that's mindfulness with love and kindness combined, rather than with force of like, I want my mind to be different, because that doesn't work. I hope that answers your question a bit.
Thank you, Venerable.
Just to clarify, I believe the question was specifically for dealing with the hindrance of like sloth and torpor, but trying to incorporate that non-forcefulness. If that
what was it? You sloth and torpor? So I missed that. I think.
She mentioned both wandering mind and sloth and torpor.
Okay, but there's wandering mind also. Yeah, but Ajahn Brahm basically he says thank you, by the way. The wandering mind, everybody has that, first of all. Depends a bit. If you're just coming home and you're just sitting on your cushion and you've been busy all day, your mind is bound to be a bit restless and processing all this information. My experience is that if you just sit without trying to force it to do anything, at some point it will become more quiet. So another way is just being content to be here. It's like realizing like, oh, I've got nothing to do right now. I'm just sitting on my cushion, nothing more to do. All that stuff I've done in the day, that's gone. Nothing more to do and nowhere to go. And this time is for me, just be content in the moment and looking at it that way. Sloss and torpor. Ajahn Brahm has actually a method that I'd never heard before, and that's also not so much in the suttas. Quite often you're being told it's like, oh, well, do walking meditation or splash water in your face, etc. Ajahn Brahm basically says, well, let it. Just sleep. And then at some point you like if you're really tired and your body obviously need it, and then fighting it, you're just wasting more energy and you already have not enough energy, so that doesn't help. But if you just let it, otherwise in your meditation, then you wake up after 10 minutes and you're fine. If it's a like a real mental loss and torpor rather than that your body is tired. So yeah, you can just try out what works for you there.
Thank you, Venerable. And Kazar Friend says, I feel like me pursuing gender stuff could be a hindrance to practicing Buddhism. Like I'm seeking an external way to resolve suffering that I should be resolving internally. Am I right to worry? Well, from how you phrased the question, like gender stuff, I would say when in doubt, leave it out, in the sense that my understanding, to actually, I mean, gender dysphoria is a serious thing. It's not just like gender stuff. So to actually start pursuing gender affirming surgery and treatment, it's not because one is kind of like, oh, I'm experiencing a little bit of suffering and let me see if this will work out. But rather, I mean, it has to come first and foremost from a lot of like a journey. And I advise you to go to a therapist and really exploring what is happening in the mind. And it is, from my understanding, from all the people that I know that have gone through, it's not something that, oh, maybe I might do this or I might not. It's like, I have to do this. It's basically a sort of life or death situation. So I would, I would encourage you to explore with someone who is very knowledgeable on the subject matter. I don't know if Venerable Bhima, you have another perspective.
Yeah, indeed, if it's really gender dysphoria, then indeed what you said is like go and to a therapist and explore together how things are. Yeah, what the best way is for you. If it's not, because I don't know, of course I don't know you, so I can't quite comment on that. An external way to resolve suffering. If it's about, I'm a woman and I see so much patriarchy and misogyny out there. If you can try and like if somebody says something or so does something, you can try and make them aware of that is painful and etc. But do it also with a little bit of love and kindness in there for that person being obviously ignorant and not understanding what they're doing and not understanding that it is painful and not right. But always look at your own mind first and like see where you're coming from, if you're coming from anger or you're coming from love and kind, where you're coming from, and work on that. So yeah, I would say work from the inside first of all.
Can I ask a related question?
Yes.
So I think this topic, although this person is talking about gender dysphoria specifically, I think it relates to a broader topic about when we're experiencing external suffering, when is it valuable to address that external source versus when it's valuable to adjust our mindset to develop contentedness towards that thing. So could you talk more, just a little more in general about about that, about when it's valuable to solve the external source?
Yeah, my understanding actually is that is addressed in a lot of detail in the Sabbasava Sutta by the Buddha. So in Nikaya too, the Buddha basically gives us all the directions not to copy and paste the same sort of like endurance, but rather there are things that need to situations where we need to, the appropriate response is endure, and some other situations where the appropriate response is get the hell out. And so and also other different scenarios. And to a certain degree, I would say that some of it, because obviously the Buddha doesn't go into the specifics of maybe the, it doesn't say, hey, by the way, if you are a bhikkhuni in West Orange, New Jersey, dealing with, male person or female person, or like, all of these different details. Sometimes we can get a little bit confused on like, oh, which one is it? And we need to also allow ourselves to make mistakes sometimes, and also like basically be result oriented. So is there a decrease of suffering in the mind or increase of suffering? And so if we see that the result that we're getting is not essentially alleviating suffering, and is increasing unwholesome mind states, then we try another technique and we see what's the result here. And then we learn from both, when we get it right and when we also don't get it right. And we forgive ourselves when we don't get it right, and we compliment ourselves when we get it right. And I think in that way we grow in Dhamma.
We can't cure samsara, basically.
And can you talk about the benefits of practicing in seclusion, Bhante?
Well, for one thing, then the more conversation you engage in, then the more noise there will be in your mind. So when you're in seclusion, there's a lot less conversation, possibly none at all, no conversation at all. So then your mind will be much quieter, which will usually then mean that it's much easier to focus during your meditation practice. So it's one of the big benefits. Also in seclusion, you have a lot less opportunities to generate bad karma, because you can't say reckless things or do offensive things. So makes it easier to keep some of the precepts if you're practicing in seclusion. It's a really good opportunity to put down our projection of personality, because when we're around other people, we're constantly projecting a personality and an image of ourselves for other people, whether we consciously recognize it or not. We're always feeling out what other people expect us to present ourselves as, and presenting ourselves in some relationship to their expectations. So when you're in seclusion, you get to totally drop all of that social dance of who is this person and who am I and how are these two fictitious entities supposed to behave in relationship to each other. You get to just drop all of that, and you don't need to be anybody, and you don't need to worry what anybody is thinking about the fictitious person that you're pretending to be. Like, you get to just drop all of that, and it's actually really delightful.
Lots of smiles in the audience, so it seems like the President's an empty cloud approve. And Sara says, Venerables, what do you think of astrology, Reiki, tarot, and those things? Tarot? Is that how you pronounce it in English?
That's how I've heard it pronounced.
Do you think those things can help in any way in the spiritual path, Venerable Vimala?
I don't think so, but maybe Bhante or has a different
No,
idea?
I think not going to help.
Okay.
It's all just, and there's lots of games you can play in samsara, and some of these games might have some truth to them, but they don't help us attain awakening.
So if you go to Southeast Asia, the monastics are a little bit more fun than us, so they might have a different take. And says, greetings, venerables. Does every Buddha have a Brahma Sahampati to request them to teach? Is being born a Sampati a goal to aspire to like Sariputta, aspire to be a Buddha's foremost disciple?
No.
Can you?
Oh, more detail. Okay. Yes. No. Not every Buddha has the Brahma Sahampati request him to teach. It's actually doubtful whether Shakyamuni had the Buddha Sahampati request him to teach, because it appears in one place in the suttas, but there's multiple versions of that sutta, not all of which have this character of Brahma Sahampati. So there's some doubt as to whether that actually happened or whether it was added to the text later. And definitely not every single Buddha has a Brahma Sahampati invite them to teach. This is something which appeared in some of the later apocryphal literature, this idea that every single Buddha's life is a near perfect replica of every other Buddha's life. And I find this incredibly far-fetched, and in my mind, it's just ridiculous. It's just no. Like, where do they come up with this stuff? Are there people who aspire to be a Brahma who invites a Buddha to teach? Well, yeah, of course. People aspire towards all kinds of things. But I don't particularly recommend it. I would recommend that you aspire to be awakened. So in the story of the Brahma Sahampati inviting the Buddha to teach, the person you want to be in that story is the Buddha, not the Brahma Sahampati. The Brahma Sahampati is not an enlightened being.
Bante, Ajahn Brahm always says it's like when somebody becomes Buddha, so it becomes enlightened of its own efforts, or his own, without a teacher in that life. The mind tends to not want to go in the direction of teaching or doing anything at all until somebody asks them, and says, like, out of compassion for the world, please do teach. And that's where the Brahma Sahampati comes in. But what do you think about that?
I mean, it's a plausible enough theory, so I've heard this before, but I do wonder in that I've actually reflected, why wouldn't the Buddha get up and teach? The Buddha had already developed boundless compassion for all beings. And actually, from the Mahayana perspective, the Buddha also had this wish to attain awakening for the benefit of all beings. So why would he drop that the moment he attained awakening? It seems a bit inexplicable. You clearly have something to say.
Was it that clear?
Yes, it was crystal clear.
My cultural conditioning is transparent, apparently. Well, because I don't see in the suttas anywhere where the Buddha just starts talking out of the blue, like, and it's a little bit different than like, kind of, we have, it's not that he's like, oh, Buddha says, like, or like here is like trying to, there's always someone aside from when he starts teaching, but even when he continues teaching, there's always someone that is asking him a question and he answers that question. And I find that actually very inspiring, because that also is what got me into Buddhism. I feel like actually that was my experience when I went to the monastery in Italy. Nobody was interested in telling me anything until I asked questions. So there seems to be a little bit that. And then out of compassion, I feel like the Buddha answers.
But even in the story of Brahma Sahampati, so we have the Brahma Sahampati saying, oh, there are beings with little dust in their eyes, who will understand the Dhamma. And then the Buddha's like thinking, well, okay, so then who could understand? Who will I go and teach? And he thinks of, well, his former teachers, but they were passed away, so it wasn't an option. And he thinks about his 5 former companions, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go and teach them the Dhamma. So they did not ask him to teach them. He went to them with the mission of teaching the Dhamma to people who had not asked him to teach them.
That's a good point, actually. If that is actually true.
But we will never know, really.
Yes,
it remains in the realm of theory.
Yes.
There is one way to find out, which is to become a Buddha, and then you will know.
Okay, so all of you out there, please do so.
Linda?
I was just going to say how much I appreciate this conversation because it's always bothered me that somebody had to like point out to the Buddha that he had to teach. It just sort of like felt odd, and not that I think I think some people talk about omniscience or non-omniscience, or it just always, I shouldn't say bother. It just always confused me. And I've asked many different people, but I just am really appreciating the conversation. Like, why would someone that is not enlightened have to ask the Buddha to teach? And it's just really interesting to hear the conversation. So.
Yeah, and I've heard at least a dozen different explanations for these things. So this has been an ongoing debate in Buddhism for as long as there's been records on debates in Buddhism.
But also fairly pointless because it doesn't particularly matter.
Yeah.
Well, we're all grateful that the Buddha did teach and that we have all of these teachings and that we can practice them. Yes.
Something that comes to mind is it's hard to help someone that doesn't want to be helped. Perhaps the Buddha knew that his 5 companions, were seeking enlightenment, and that's why I went to teach them. And you're talking about going to different monasteries, and the monks are just kind of quiet because they don't want to force anything upon you. But when you ask out of compassion, they give the best answer.
Sadhu. That's thank you for sharing that wisdom, Kobe. That's put very simply and very well. Thank you. Yes, Tinuri.
So I have a question in regards to something that I've also experienced in my practice recently. So I've noticed that I feel like I have a sensation of like my departed relatives appearing, or like not like physically, but like I feel like maybe like those I've probably hurt in the past, I feel like I have a sense of like feeling that they're maybe around and like maybe wanting merit or something like that as I'm practicing and cultivating more merit and like on the path. So what is your advice on like, I guess like on that and like on how to share the merit? Because I remember I think hearing like last year too, and like growing up too, like the monks would always advise like when offering dana to like mindfully share merits to those to all sentient beings because they arrive. Sometimes they can arrive like when merit is being offered because they want the merit, but like sometimes if like the person themselves isn't really sharing it or really being mindful about it, they don't receive it. They can get like sometimes angry about that. I don't know if you can please clarify.
This is actually such a great question for Danwei. We were having that conversation the other day.
Okay.
Speak loudly.
So it's quite a common teaching in Thailand, actually, that if that all of us have harmed someone in the past, we've all done some bad karma, some bad karma, and it is possible that the beings we've hurt can come to us looking for merit, but even if they don't, they appreciate receiving it, and so they also I found this in the lineage of Ajahn Chah, for example. At Wat Matjan, we chant verses of sharing merit every morning and every night. It's the standard part of the morning and evening chanting. And I heard the same thing was done at a monk that I knew was at Nongpapong for Kwanzaa. He said actually they did the same thing there every morning and every evening, chanting verses of sharing merit. And they say that the teaching Huanan gave me, I can't say that directly. He said that it depends on simply making the determination to share merit with your karmic, usually translated as karmic debtors. but I think it actually should be common creditors, those whom we owe a debt to. And make a determination to share merit with the common creditors, those we've performed in the past. And how effective it is depends on how calm our minds are. So an especially good time is like after chanting or after meditation, something like this. They have a method for doing it, where they kind of a ritual method where they have a decanter with a dish. And they'll pour water out of the decanter into the dish. I think that the point of this is to help them focus the mind, make the mind calm on it, and to focus the mind on this kind of determination. And then they take the water in the dish out and pour it out for a tree. This is kind of part of a sacred ceremony. They also recommend sharing merit with our parents. So sharing merit with parents regularly. And of course, we can pay. We can share. I use a Thai term pay, but you share loving kindness with common creditors, they say, as well. That they appreciate that too. So.
Thank you,
Sure.
Bhante. Excellent. And Bill says, "What do you know of the Zen book Shobogenzo? What do you think about it?"
I mean, I last read it almost 20 years ago, but I remember thinking it was great. But also, it's a extremely difficult and advanced book, so it's not particularly beginner friendly. But it is one of the classics in Japanese Zen Buddhism.
Great. Thank you, Bhante. And Sara says, "How important is for you veganism or vegetarianism in the spiritual path? Do you think someone could obtain enlightenment or progress in the path eating meat?" Well, in the Theravada tradition, actually, vegetarianism or veganism is mandatory. So we are historically a mendicant order, and just to put it simply, beggars can't be choosers. So you will find monasteries, sometimes monasteries that are vegetarian, like actually Empty Cloud Monastery, except for Huyer, the resident cat that is currently meowing, who is not on a vegetarian diet. But yeah, so obviously through this lenses, one doesn't purify the mind through diet essentially, and the majority of monastics in Asian countries where people are reputed to be enlightened in Southeast Asia definitely eat meat. PJ says, "What do you think about the Visuddhimagga by Buddhaghosa?"
I find it a very interesting reference work, but it's not. All the commentaries actually are there for reference, but don't take it too much as gospel. It's not like the Bible of Buddhism. It's often referred to. The early Buddhist text is where all the teachings are. And of course, the people like Buddhaghosa and other commentators were a bit closer in time, at least to the Buddha than we are. So whatever their opinion is could be helpful or not. So you can look into that. But that's my opinion about the Visuddhimagga.
Thank you, Venerable. And Richard says, "My cousin who committed suicide on his second attempt 13 years ago came to mind as I was contemplating my own impermanence, remembering the lost look on his face as I hugged him at the hospital after his first failed attempt to take his life. A week later, he posted the word bye on Facebook just before ending his life. Will the good karma from his past lives possibly help him avoid being reborn in the lower realms, or has this act generated too much bad karma to be reborn a human again?"
Well, like the karma we've made in past lives, good and bad, is so vast. So you never know actually where it's going to be ends up. Of course, like if you are dying with a lot of negativity in the mind, which you do as you commit suicide, then of course your mind tends to go in a negative direction. So, but that doesn't mean that that person's there. Like even if they end up in a lower realm, that they'll certainly not be there forever and ever. And good karma will also ripen at some point. So yeah.
Lasso, do you have anything else you would like to add? Yeah, sometimes, I mean, I feel like we can get very much tied up in the realm of speculation. Not that you're doing that, of course, but yeah, the encouragement, Richard, not to think too much in that, but rather understand that, you know, it's just difficult to live. You know, we all have this experience of dukkha, and we all make lots of good actions and a lot of bad actions. So it's not necessarily like the last thing that we do the moment before death that, you know, kind of just like is exactly that will lead the new life. There's so many different causes and conditions, and the Buddha, I feel, is, you know, it gives us this really wise advice not to think too much about, you know, karma in that sense, because our mind will explode. Like there's so many too many intricacies, and then we can get very much tied up in all these speculations. And also for not only for people who have departed, but also people who are alive and are going through a lot of distress. There's lots of like ideas, you know, that people can have about why anyone is experiencing any kind of distress. And the Buddha actually gives this as advice. Is it Megiyam? I can't remember the name of this householder who kind of goes on all these speculations, and he's like, yeah, don't do that. Only one like me can actually know where that person, what's the destination of that person, for sure. And so this particular householder was speculating that actually someone had gone to a hell realm because of certain actions that they had seen, but instead actually apparently there was a little bit more to the story, which the Buddha elucidated, and actually they had become a stream enter in the point of death. So this to be said, that I feel like that's what we should remind, and really look at what can we do right now, and we can make lots of good deeds, of meritorious deeds right now, and share the merit with the departed ones, the loved ones, as actually Tan Wade was suggesting earlier. I think it's a really beautiful practice, and we can learn from our brothers and sisters in Asia how they do things.
In Christianity, death by suicide assures you a spot in hell.
Oh,
so perhaps that is why.
Okay, thank you for
whatever
clarifying
denomination, whether you're Catholic or Anglican or evangelical or anything.
Okay.
Right there.
Thank you for clarifying that. Well, also remembering that, you know, also in the worst case scenario, also that is impermanent. So, you know, sometimes the impermanence is actually like a good thing. Yeah, right, exactly. But in Buddhism, everything is impermanent except for Nibbana. So like, you know, when we're experiencing also a lot of dukkha, or we'll end up in a hell realm. We've already been to a hell realm. So that was impermanent. And now we're not in hell realm anymore. So so keeping that perspective, I think, is useful in general. And Joe says, I think Brahma Sahampati is a non-returner. Is non-returner a good halfway goal between the Arhat and Bodhisattva paths? Can non-returners help Bodhisattvas over eons from the safety of the pure abode?
This is actually really interesting. I've never heard the non-returner as being a way to balance the Arhat and Bodhisattva ideals. That's very interesting. But what I would actually recommend instead, so one of the problems is if we get too specific in our aspirations, then we wind up missing the mark. So what I would recommend is be a little more general, like, may I attain awakening? And along the way, may I help others also attain awakening? So don't get too specific about it. Just keep it general like that. Instead of being like, I want to be Brahma Sahampati, the non-returner who invites the 14th Buddha from now to teach. Like, don't get too specific. Just, may I attain awakening, and may I also help others along the path as I progress along it.
Thank you. And Scott says, it seems that a problem with human relationships is that we can blame others for our suffering. How can we skillfully approach this tendency in our own hearts and mind?
Yeah, it's always the other who's done it. And Ajahn Brahma says, it's like, well, when you point a finger at another, there's three fingers pointing back at you. So yeah, look at your own mind first of all before judging somebody else. And just look what's going on there, because you don't see the whole picture. You don't see what's going on in another person's mind, why they are doing things, and you don't see what's going on in your own mind and why you're doing things. So yeah, look at in yourself first of all and find out what is the underlying hindrances also there, and how to solve those first of all before you look outside. But don't judge anyone.
Thank you, Venerable. And last question from Joe, who says, I was able to watch that very fiery, Tibetan monastic you recommended, Ayasoma. She seemed very averse to organ donation due to the mind being negatively agitated by the organ removal. Oh, that's unusual. What are your thoughts on organ donation at death? Good karma, good idea. Well, I'm actually absolutely in favor of organ donation at death. And absolutely, I mean, it's good karma, like in the sense that you make the decision when you're alive, so you make the good karma. And it's definitely a good idea because, you know, at least like, yeah, I'm all for composting. So I think it's totally good.
Recycle.
Yeah, reuse, recycle, totally. But if you actually can send me the video of, that you're talking about where that is mentioned, I'm very curious. I'm very surprised to hear that she can be against organ removal. That's odd. So if you can send it to me, I'm very interested to see that. But yeah, I think it's a very good thing in general. We're already way too attached to this body while it's alive, and to also like be attached to it when it's just dead and putrefied. I mean, it's a little bit really crazy. All right, I think we're all in agreement tonight. It's great, except maybe with Brahma Sahampati. All right, so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you all next week.